Hello everyone, today we continue exploring MES, Manufacturing Execution System Software. We already know how to work with databases, how to build SQL queries, and how to turn them into functions, or in other words, objects. We understand how to integrate these objects into the architecture and the logic of a program. Thus, we can say that we have mastered object-oriented programming. We also know how to work with peripheral devices, how to program microcontrollers, how to use drivers and DLLs, and how to integrate all of these components into the program's algorithm. We know how to collect data from peripherals in real time, how to connect parallel processes, and much more. And now we have finally approached something that every programmer in one way or another has to eventually come. Let's take a step back for a moment and ask ourselves a kind of philosophical question. What is the point? As we keep developing and improving our programming skills, we should understand where we're heading and what we ultimately want to achieve. If we look at individual career paths, the journey of a programmer can be divided into several stages that we may call this way: junior developer, senior developer, and eventually manager. Just like the saying goes, what soldier doesn't want to become a general? So let's skip all the intermediate steps for a moment and look directly at the top of the professional path. And here comes an important realization. Programming is not the goal, it is a tool that allows us to create something meaningful, not just a function or a line of code, but a product that performs a real business or societal function, something that can make the world better. That was a bit of a philosophical detour. In practice, of course, everything is more straightforward. Programming is used to optimize processes, but if you don't understand the process itself, how can you optimize it? I think the idea is clear. So, returning to our topic, we are exploring how a manufacturing execution system, MES, works. So, what knowledge do we need in order to build this kind of system? Let's see. First of all, we have to be specialists in the domain for which we are creating the program. Second, beyond the technical aspects, we need to understand the general principles of inventory and product flow, accounting, logistics, certification, and document management, as well as have awareness of competitors, suppliers, and customers. We also need to understand how personnel management works, how tasks are assigned, and what kind of reporting is expected. In addition to efficiently carry out all these functions, we have to design proper communication mechanisms. At this point, you might say that it's impossible for one person to know all of this, and even more so to implement it alone. That's absolutely true. This is why a team of specialists is required. And here, beyond your programming skills, another capability becomes critical: your management skills. Specifically, how to select the right specialists, how to build a healthy psychological environment within the team, one that is collaborative, constructive, and encourages healthy competition. At the beginning of your journey as a programmer, you probably can't imagine yourself in this role, but over time, experience will naturally lead you to this understanding. Now, returning to our program. What I'm going to tell you today, you won't find it in any academic courses. You won't read it in books or manuals, and no famous bloggers or coaches will teach you this. And you might ask, why? Am I the smartest here? No, it's simply because every experience is unique. Once I asked my professor at Stanford University, how can you teach business administration if you haven't built a business yourself? The answer surprised me and made a strong impression on me, and I'll share it with you at the end of this episode. But for now, let's dive back into our system. So, in the previous episode, we looked at how to deploy the system on a computer, how to log into it, and we explored some of the functional roles of different users. Here, I should mention that the user interface you see is a demo version, and I intentionally set the window size so that it doesn't take up the full screen. This allows me to conveniently work with other applications at the same time. To begin with, let's understand the structure of our system. It's hidden, you could say, like one of Lord Voldemort's Horcrux, and it's located right here. When accessing this table, it's important to note that it should be available only to key personnel in the company. those who are authorized to assign functions, privileges, passwords, and roles. So we can say that this is one of the most sensitive and secure parts of the entire system. Also, I want to mention that in this demo version, all names are fictional, as well as all products and their prices. If you recognize a familiar name, it's not the person you think it is. And if you see a product at an attractive price, you won't be able to buy it. But I think that's obvious. So, in my demo system, there are 11 employees, a relatively small company. But what's interesting is that regardless of whether the company is small or large, the overall set of functions remains essentially the same. So, what functions do we have here? The cells marked with an X indicate which functions are assigned to each employee. And here I want to immediately draw your attention, and I'll keep drawing your attention throughout the video to small details that we built into the system in order to minimize operator errors. Let's take Suzanne as an example. As we discussed in the previous episode, Suzanne has been assigned the functions login, work structure, and database query. Now, let's say I want to assign her an additional function. For example, forms, work forms. That means Suzanne will now be able and required to work with forms. We'll get to those shortly. To do this, I need to place an X in the cell corresponding to Suzanne and the forms function. Now, imagine I make a mistake and type not only X but also some extra characters. When I press save, the system will automatically recognize the correct value, the X, and insert it into the table correctly. As a result, Suzanne will be assigned this new function, and therefore will now have the responsibility to work with forms. Let me list the functions I could assign to Suzanne. I could give her access to inventory, production, managerial tasks, operational tasks, system data, SOP, standard operation procedure, parameters, task options, queries, archive management, calendar functions, and operator level work. Why am I not doing that? Because in my opinion, Suzanne either does not have sufficient qualifications or I simply don't consider it necessary to assign her these additional responsibilities. Now, when building the company structure, I defined 6 key fields. In the first column, we have the username, login. This is what the employee uses to access the system. Next comes the password. Of course, it should be unique. Here I used 123 for everyone just to keep things simple in the demo. Then we have the first and last name. And as you can see, there are no spaces between the first and last name. The program automatically removes spaces when saving data into the database. Why is this done? Because we follow the principle as it sounds, so it's written. But when working with databases, spaces are irrelevant. We always search by keywords. So we remove spaces as well as any non-alphabetic characters in order to simplify the string structure. The next column is department. Here we can define the employee's functional responsibilities, their association with a specific workplace, or even an abstract role, essentially anything that helps describe the employee's position within the company. In the key column, I specify the employee's key role. So we added a new function for Suzanne, forms. Let's log in as Suzanne and see what changed. Now we can see that in work options, the forms function has appeared. In the previous episode, we already explored the other 2 functions, structure and database query. And now let's go into forms. Let's try to understand this new function and imagine that Suzanne has no mentor and she has been asked to figure out this new responsibility on her own. So what do we see? We have 3 windows: inventory storage list, collect required items, take the form to apply items, and pick the addressee to get form to print. We also see an empty table and the reset button. Let me press the reset button and see what happens. I can see that the table refreshed, but it's still empty. Nothing has appeared. Let's open the first window and see what's inside. Here we see the names of the warehouses. Since I work in the company, I know that these warehouses store inventory. Let's open them and see what each one contains. In the first warehouse, we have some items. The second one also contains some items. The third has fewer inventory. The fourth is empty. Fab 3 is empty. Raw materials is empty. Demolition is empty. And for return has some items. As you understand, this is a demo version. In a real system, each warehouse would contain actual inventory. Even just by looking at the names, which in this case also correspond to table names in our database, we can interpret their meaning. Warehouse is for general store. Fabs are for storage of my production lines. Raw materials are for consumables. Demolition is for scrapped or defective items, and for return contains items to be returned. It's important to know that in this system we can add an unlimited number of warehouses with any names, but we'll get to that later. However, Suzanne does not have permission to create new warehouses. She can only work with existing ones. So the first window is clear. Now let's look at the second window. Here we see various forms.
Form invoice, form purchase order, form quotation, form sales receipt, form packing slip, item label, item barcode.
We can apply all these forms to items. For example, create documents, generate barcodes and labels, and so on. Since this is a process, the third window represents the participants of the process. Here we have
Internal operations, vendors, customers, workers, services, contractors, delivery, customs,
and others. Because this role is called forms, it implies that from here we can generate and print various documents addressed to participants listed in the third window. We already tried the reset function and understand that if something goes wrong, we can always return to the initial state. Now let's try using this function. We are currently in the Fab 1 table. I click on an item and the second table appears, showing a summary of selected data from the first table. These are the items selected for our upcoming transaction. If I try to select the same item twice, the system won't allow it. It shows the message, "These items is already collected." Let's say I select 3 items for the transaction. For example, I also add nails and screw. If there are many items, I can use the search function. At the bottom of the interface, there is table search. For example, I search for door. Press search and the table updates. Now I see all items that match this keyword. I select the one that I need and add it to the second table. Now we see 4 selected items. In this second table, I cannot edit anything. It's purely operational. I simply verify that these are the correct items. Next, I choose what I want to do with them in the second window. Take the form to apply items. Let's start with the first form, invoice. An invoice is a document we issue to a customer for the goods sold. A table appears, which we can now edit and add comments to. This table contains all the items we selected, and now we begin forming the invoice based on the purchase order. What is a purchase order? It's a request created by the customer where prices, timeframes, taxes, and additional service costs, such as delivery, installation, or assembly, for example, in the case of furniture, have already been agreed upon. Let's assume I have this purchase order in front of me and I'm creating the invoice based on it. I can modify the quantity, the units per item, the price. For example, I can increase it if needed. I can also add an additional charge, for example, an extra $10 for services. Then I might try to adjust the tax, but I notice it resets to 0. Why? Because at the top of the user interface there is an option, amount USD taxable, and I need to check it. I also need to mark the additional charge as taxable by selecting the corresponding checkbox. And here we have another very important function, gross margin. This is where your profit is defined. If we don't specify a gross margin, it means that we manually adjusted the price, either added a markup or applied a discount. By the way, in the US, there are three main terms used in sales: margin, markup, and discount. Write in the comments if similar concepts exist in your country. Let me explain the difference with a simple example. As you can see, there are two key concepts: markup and margin. Discount is straightforward as is. It's simply a reduction in price. Markup is how much you increase the price relative to the cost in order to get the selling price. For example, you buy a product for $100 and decide to sell it for $150. Using the formula, your markup is 50%. Margin, on the other hand, is calculated differently. It represents the percentage of the selling price that is your profit. In the same example, cost is $100, selling price is $150, the margin is approximately 33.3%. So even though the selling price is the same, markup and margin are different values because they are calculated from different bases. Markup is calculated from the cost, margin is calculated from the selling price. Now pay attention to the selling price in the price USD column and how it changes when I add gross margin. I enter 10% gross margin and you can see that the price USD increases, meaning the profit has been added. At the same time, all related values are automatically recalculated, such as amount USD, subtotal USD, and total due, so everything updates dynamically. At this point, it should be clear that it's impossible to program this kind of process without understanding basic accounting principles. That covers the numerical part of the invoice. Also, it's worth noting how convenient the interface is. In the second table, highlighted in yellow, we can always see the original item data. So if we lose track or forget something, like how many items are in stock, we can quickly verify it. Yes, and one more important thing, taxes. For taxes, we have a separate table in the database where different types of taxes and rates are defined: local, state, excise. We will get back to this later when we discuss system settings. For now, we are talking about selling goods, in this case, writing off items through an invoice. At the moment when we confirm the creation of the invoice, the items are automatically deducted from the database. The next step is to choose who we are making this transaction with, whether we are selling or processing a return. Well, essentially, those are the only options. I go to window number 3 and select the addressee, meaning who I am making the deal with. For example, I choose customers and from there I select Larry Jones. The invoice appears. Here I can still make some changes. In the green section I have the address, name, phone number. All that information can be edited. Everything else is already fixed by the previous steps. I review how my invoice looks and if everything is correct, I confirm it. Here I need to make sure everything is exactly as required. We have standard columns here, item code, description, quantity. For example, I'm selling 3 doors. Each door equals 2 boxes. So in total, that becomes 6 boxes. All of this is calculated automatically. There is also the unit price, total price for the quantity, additional charges, subtotal before tax, tax rate, tax amount, and the final total due. All of this is calculated automatically. Here in the green section, I can also change the name of the payment recipient. I verify that everything is correct and that the total units equals 95. This will be important during shipping and during delivery receiving. Then I click the print button. An invoice document opens, ready for printing, and the new button appears, write off from database, meaning to deduct from the inventory. If everything looks correct, we proceed with the write off and confirm the deduction of goods from the warehouse. Physically, this means that in the FAB 1 table, the quantities of the sold items will decrease according to what is specified in the invoice. Now all that's left is to print the invoice in 3 copies if I'm using paper accounting. It can also be saved as a PDF for internal financial reporting, printed and mailed, or sent by email to the customer according to the terms specified in the purchase order. I write off the goods from the warehouse and see the confirmation message. Forms invoice successfully written off. Okay? It's also important to mention that in the background, at the same time, a record of Suzanne's actions with all details is written into the log table in the database. We will return to tracking operations later. Now let's look at the next operation, form purchase order. Let's say we immediately want to reorder the same items to restock our warehouse. I simply select the required quantity, set the agreed price, then choose the vendor who supplies this product, and print the purchase order. I can see that it's already generated and ready for printing. Or, for example, if I want to create an order from scratch for specific items, I go to the FAB1 table, press Reset, then select the items I'm interested in, for example, 2 items. I enter that I want to order 10 units of each, choose the supplier who provides these items, and print the purchase order. Then I send it by email or by mail, depending on the arrangement I have with that supplier. The next form I have is quotation. What is this form used for? A quotation works both ways. When someone requests a description and a quote of services from you, and when you request a description and a quote from a supplier. To formally contact a supplier, I need to prepare a specification of the items I'm interested in. If similar items are available from competitors, I can also send this form to those suppliers. Here I can use a useful feature to see the total quantity and total amount. I go to a specific warehouse, select the items I am interested in, and check how many units I have in total and the total value of those items in stock. For example, I go to the warehouse. I search for the item I need using table search. Choose the column I am interested in and then click Sum by column. I can see the total quantity. I can also calculate another column, for example, total price. And at the bottom of the interface, I can see the total quantity and the total amount calculated. By the way, we are not using point of sale (POS) here, although that capability exists in the system. Our search window can read any barcodes and QR codes. You just need to connect the appropriate scanner to the computer. You probably know what point of sale is, but just to remind you, it's a process where after scanning a product or entering its code, that item is immediately added to the customer's shopping cart. Why don't we use it here? Because MES doesn't operate like a retail store. It functions more like a warehouse. Also, if I don't like the color of my table, I can change it. For example, I can make the column headers a different color, maybe something lighter. It's very easy to adjust both the headers and the cell colors. So, back to working with the quotation form. I select the item I'm interested in, enter the desired quantity, and I can also adjust the price I'd like to purchase it for. Then I choose the supplier I want to send the request to and click Print. The form is generated in the browser, and now I can send it to the supplier. The next form is sales receipt. If a sale has already been completed and payment has been made, the customer may request a receipt. In this case, we use the sales receipt. I go to the FAB1 table, select, for example, 3 items, let's say these ones, and choose sales receipt. The customer will be Larry Jones. The sales receipt is generated and I print it. So this is the receipt along with the printed invoice. As in previous cases, we could also add a margin markup or make other adjustments if needed. Next, we have the packing slip. This is a shipping document without pricing information. I click Reset, go to the warehouse from which the goods will be shipped, select the required items, enter the quantities, choose packing slip, specify the quantity, and also enter the weight in the weight field. Then I select the customers, Larry Jones, and print the packing slip. I can also create and print a packing slip at the same time as generating the invoice. The next form is item label. If I have a large table, I can use search with different criteria, and for each individual item, I can print its own label. But since the table here is small, I can simply click on any item and print a label for it. I can also create my own barcode or scan an existing one. For example, I can type and create and print my own barcode. Or I can scan a barcode that already exists. That's how it looks. The next function is specifically creating a barcode. Here I can choose whether I want to print a small barcode or a large format. First, I print the small one and then the large one. So we quickly went through one of many functions, forms. An operator who is assigned this role can efficiently handle sales, ordering goods, managing shipping documents, and working with related labels and barcodes. And we could stop here with this role if not for one question. Do we have a sales history? Suzanne does not have permission to check sales history. Let's log in as Bill because he does have those permissions. Then we'll look at Suzanne and see what she did today. Here we can see all the transactions Suzanne performed today. Now let's look at the documents. Here in the doc number column, we see the sequential number of the document, the invoice, and after the slash, we see that this invoice was written off from the database, marked as right. For example, the latest one shows 16/W. This is the invoice summary table. To view how this invoice was printed, we go to Form Invoice Details. Find the invoice we need. For example, I select this one and click Print. I can also export this invoice to Excel if I need to edit something or for any other reason. Additionally, I have the option to generate a quotation and a sales receipt based on this invoice, and I can open them in Excel as well. If I click Switch to Multi-Lines, I will see here all details of the invoice. Now let's do the same with Purchase Order Summary. Here we also see all the actions performed. Then we go into Purchase Order Details, where we can print the purchase order or open it in Excel. Next, we can do the same with Quotation Summary. View the summary, go into the details, select what we need, and print it, or open it in Excel. The same applies to Sales Receipt Summary and Sales Receipt Details. I select a sales receipt and print it or open it in Excel. Everything works. The same process applies to Packing Slip. Here we see the ID in the first column and we can view the details of any packing slip by printing it. If we enable multi-lines, we see more detailed information in the table. If we disable it, the detailed view disappears. So what else do we have here? Form documents. So we've just looked at how the logic of working with inventory functions in our system. But this, of course, only covers the part related to writing off goods and everything associated with that. Later, we will explore the processes of receiving goods, as well as creating products within our production chain, how we can build a single product with multiple components. In manufacturing, there is a cumulative effect, where different parts come together to form a more complex product with its own characteristics. That's where we will directly approach the production process. For now, we are focusing on the general properties of our system, the essential parts related to accounting, inventory management, and logistics. In future episodes, we will go through other features and functions of the program. And here I have a note to remind myself of something I wanted to say today, so I don't forget. If you still remember the beginning of this episode, of course. The answer from my Stanford professor was this. First, a business is built, and only then do we study it. This goes back to the idea that every MES system is unique, just like the business it is created for. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you for joining Laplanda Tech. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you learned something new today, give this video a like and subscribe to learn more from upcoming episodes.